I was just grooving to that. Sorry. Welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, things adjacent. In this video, I'm going to read two articles. I have no idea how long these articles are or how long they're going to take me to read, but I'm just going to jump in and start right away with this article titled "Western Drought Ranks Among the Worst of the Last Millennium." This is from Scientific American. As temperatures warm, it becomes more likely that drought will match past megadroughts for length as well. How long is this article? Probably not that long. We'll see. In the late 13th century, Native Americans living in cliff dwellings on what is now the Four Corners region of the U.S. Southwest abandoned their homes en masse. They moved into river valleys closer to the water that had become a scarce resource in the midst of one of the worst of megadroughts to hit the western part of the continent in the last millennium. Scientists who study climate history have long been concerned that rising temperatures could help tip the already dry region into megadroughts, generally defined as droughts lasting 20 years or longer, again more easily in the future. A major worry in a rapidly growing part of the country that has already had trouble meeting water needs during nearly 2 decades of drought. Park Williams, a bioclimatologist, Park Williams, it's an excellent name for a bioclimatologist at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, had always envisioned past megadroughts as having conditions unrecognizable to us today. But several years ago, he realized that the massive tree die-offs, bark beetle infestations, and wildfire boom he envisioned for those past events had actually come to pass in recent years. We're seeing it already. The epiphany led him to look at how the region's recent drought compares to the megadroughts of the last millennium, and he discovered it rivals them in severity. If it continues, it could be the first megadrought of the era of human-caused climate change. Scientific American spoke with Williams earlier this month about his research at the annual meeting of the American Geophysical Union in Washington, D.C. How do we know what past megadroughts were like? The primary way that we know about the megadroughts is from tree ring records. Trees grow annual tree rings every year. During years of really good growth, a ring is wide, and during years of bad growth, the ring is narrow. And so in dry places where trees are struggling during the driest years, the droughts are preserved in the tree ring records as clusters of narrow rings. There are other pieces of evidence about these megadroughts as well. In California's Sierra Nevada mountains, there were 2 periods between, say, 850 AD and 1300 AD, each about 100 to 150 years long, when it was so persistently dry that riverbeds that are now perpetually in water were dry enough persistently to be able to actually allow for trees to grow to maturity. And now we see in those riverbeds and the bottoms of some lakes the stumps of those trees. Scientists have gone and collected wood from these stumps and done carbon dating on them to place them during these megadroughts. How do tree rings help compare past megadroughts to drought today? In Western North America, we're really lucky that we have tree ring records from across the continent. And at a really high density, there's more tree ring records in this small area than any other area in the world. Many of them have preserved records of drought within them with extremely high fidelity. The reason for that is Western North America is just a dry place. So trees in general are going to store drought information really well in their tree ring records. So we took advantage of this really high density of drought-sensitive tree ring records to reconstruct how soil moisture has varied over the last 1,200 years. And we came up with one single record of drought variability from 800 AD to present for the Western US using those tree ring records. Then we were able to compare this current 19-year drought to all the other 19-year periods during since 800 in order to assess how bad is this drought, not only in the century-long context, but in the millennial-long context. When did you start thinking that this current drought might be on par with these past mega droughts? In 2012, I did a study using tree records across the Southwest. I saw that the 13-year drought from 2000 through 2012 was standing out like a sore thumb, like far worse than anything in the last 400 years. It was looking a lot like the first 13 years of the mega drought in the late 1500s. So that's how I got thinking about this. And actually, if we now retrospectively still look at 2000 through 2012, that was a really, really intense 13 years. So we found that this 19-year period coming in fourth in terms of severity in the last 1,200 years, but that 13-year period might actually come in first in all 13-year periods when we look across the entire western U.S., northern Mexico region. Did climate change contribute to this recent drought, and could it cause it to continue? Climate change can affect droughts in a couple of ways. One is if precipitation were to change due to climate change, then droughts would undoubtedly change. The other is if the evaporative demand of the atmosphere were to change, then droughts can change even if there's no long-term change in precipitation. And that's what we've seen in Western North America, where the last century has not seen really big trends in precipitation. Climate models are kind of all over the place in terms of whether or not they simulate changes in precipitation to arise as a function of increasing greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. But what has happened is that it has warmed rapidly in the last century. The western US, northern Mexico has warmed by just over 1.5 degrees Celsius over the last 120 years. Climate models say that all of that warming is due to human-caused climate change. Warming enhances the evaporative demand to the atmosphere, causing essentially every raindrop or snowflake to be a little less valuable because it's going to be more easily evaporated back to the atmosphere. That alone can drive soil moisture down, and that's what we've seen so far. We can retroactively calculate how soil moisture would have been impacted if the long-term warming trends that were caused by humans had never occurred. And in doing that, we see that this 19-year drought still would have occurred. It would still have been bad. It would compete with the worst droughts of the last century, but it wouldn't be able to compete with the droughts of the last millennium without climate change. We calculate that about 38% of the severity of the current 19-year drought was driven by the long-term warming trend. And then the other 62% of the drought would have still occurred anyway. Oh, okay. The other 62% of the drought would have still occurred anyway, just because of a random reduction in precipitation. So about 38% is due to climate change. Could this drought eventually rival past megadroughts in duration as well? In Western North America, generally La Nina type conditions when the tropical Pacific Ocean is cooler than average will promote drought. They aren't a guaranteed cause of drought, but generally in our big droughts, our big droughts coincide with La Nina events, and oftentimes droughts are ended by big El Nino events when the tropical Pacific is unusually warm that result in high precipitation. So it's entirely possible that in the next few years there will be a big El Nino event, or even a 10 or 20-year period of El Nino type sea surface temperatures, and that could end the drought. But precipitation is increasingly competing with temperature in terms of its ability to dictate the beginning and the ends of drought. And as temperatures are going up, then it's going to be harder and harder for an El Nino event to end this current drought. So it's entirely possible this drought will end in the next few years or decade, but it is increasingly probable the drought will persist. And there you go. Possible and probable. Possible and probable not. Moving on to this last article I want to read for this particular video. This is from a site called Films for Action, and it is titled, "We Are the People of the Apocalypse." Clinical psychologist John F. Shoemaker reveals the dangerous erosion of human personality at the heart of modern consumer culture. This is from December 14th, 2018. For a culture to avoid self-destruction as it progresses, writes Henry George in his classic 1883 work, Social Problems, it must develop a higher conscience, a keener sense of justice, a warmer brotherhood, a wider, loftier, truer public spirit, while ensuring responsible and visionary leaders who embrace the mental and moral universe. By stark contrast, modern consumer culture barrels in the opposite direction, breeding an increasingly trivialized and disengaged strain of personhood, devoid of the loftier qualities needed to sustain a viable society and healthy life supports. Human personality, a crisis. While the ever-deepening mental health crisis is common knowledge, less understood is the even more serious personality crisis that has rendered the consuming public largely unfit for democracy and nigh useless in the face of the multiple emergencies that beg for responsible and conscientious citizenship. In times of crisis, we turn reflexively to the state of the economy without considering possible collapses within the general state of the person, or what psychologist Erich Fromm called a culture's social character. By this he meant the shared constellation of personality and character traits disseminating from a society's dominant modes of enculturation, all of which serve to forge common values, priorities, ethics, lifestyles, and worldviews, and even the so-called will of the people. Writing when he did over 50 years ago, Fromm already noticed the unfurling of a personality crisis, using the term marketing personality to describe the one-dimensional, commodified, and desensitized eternal suckling that was, as he forewarned in the famous conclusion of Beyond the Chains of Illusion, 1962, succumbing to a culturally manufactured consensus of stupidity. Indeed, that could prove our ultimate undoing. Since then, have we reached that yet? Are we there yet? Consensus of stupidity. Since then, the social character has become so stunted, and the decline of true citizenship so complete, that some now speak of the apocalyptic personality, propelling our rush towards self-destruction. But the problem now goes far beyond an agreed upon stupidity. Cultural infantilism. Immaturity has joined forces as a cultural consensus with a growing number of social thinkers warning of the dramatic rise of psychological neoteny, otherwise known as cultural infantilization. Bruce G. Charlton's influential 2006 Medical Hypothesis article, The Rise of the Boy Genius, detailed the cultural evolution of a personality profile marked by delayed cognitive maturation, emotional and spiritual shallowness, and diminished profundity of character that manifests itself in a childlike flexibility of attitudes, behaviors, and knowledge. While these unfinished personalities may have increased adaptability in a mercurial culture of inconsistent loyalties, abbreviated attention spans, and compulsive novelty seeking, they also expose society to the rawness and limitations of youth that hamper higher order judgment and decision-making abilities and culminate in a culture of irresponsibility. In his 2017 book, The Public in Peril, Henry A. Garreau writes about the cultural infantilism of daily life, which encourages adults to assume the role of unthinking children while simultaneously crippling the imagination of the young and destroying the traditional role as the repository of society's dreams. Through the engineering of an infantilized society, he observes, thoughtlessness has become something that now occupies a privileged, if not celebrated, place in the political landscape and the mainstream cultural apparatuses. The result is a social system overly invested in ethical ignorance and a public sphere dumb to the value of an enlightened and democratic body politic. In a similar vein, sociologist Christopher Swader's book, The Capitalist Personality, 2013, documents the prevailing of a rudimental cultural personality featuring exploitive egoism, selfish ambition, and profit-mindedness that becomes the psychosocial mainspring of consumer capitalism. Although bedeviled with deadly long-term consequences, the capitalist personality was a predictable outcome of a system functionally dependent on low levels of ethical conviction, personal growth, and spiritual wakefulness. Or wokefulness, if you like. Guilt has lost its power. One of the many ways that we invite self-destruction, the climate crisis cries loudest for responsible citizenship and leadership. It is by far the greatest moral, ethical, and psychosocial challenge encountered by our species. But the cultural conditions that foster collective responsibility, other-mindedness, and conscious development have eroded. Guilt has lost much of its former powers of persuasion and deterrence. character building as a socialization pathway to ethical resolve and civic commitment is virtually extinct. The trait of narcissism, as well as diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, have risen so much in recent decades. Indeed, and I agree. And yes, it's true. So much in recent decades that many now regard the narcissistic personality as a normal outcome of current social cultural conditions. Totally and spot on. It's actually rewarded to have that. Like, I see it all day long on social media that people that act narcissistically or toxically or manipulatively, that kind of a behavior is totally encouraged. Like, yeah, go ahead. And it is very, very difficult to draw a line between what is, toxic narcissism and what is a healthy ego. Let's see. The same is true of the sociopathic personality. Researchers such as those at Essex University Center for the Study of Integrity have chronicled a deepening crisis in which people are increasingly willing to condone behavior, both in themselves and others, as well as their leaders and institutions, that once would have been deemed dishonest, immoral, unjust, and antisocial. The sociopathic personality has become integral to the workings of modern consumer capitalism, but as sociologist Charles Derber, the author of Sociopathic Society, 2013, also notes, climate change is a symptom of the sociopathic character of our capitalistic model, adiaphora. Empathy is the cornerstone of civilization and the faculty of human intelligence upon which all well-functioning societies depend, but evidence shows it to be fading from the global social character. Using data from 127 countries and over 100,000 assessments, the State of the Heart Report 2016 showed empathy to be one of the fastest declining components of overall emotional intelligence, EQ. According to sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, the psychosocial workings of consumer capitalism make such moral disassociations inevitable. In Moral Blindness, 2013, he uses the ancient Stoic word adiaphora, meaning indifference, to describe the consensus of indifference that enables consumer capitalism to fulfill its operative promise of ever-growing creative destruction. As a result, he writes, we are at risk of losing our sensitivity to the plight of others, something which applies equally to our socially sanctioned indifference toward future generations and the well-being of the planet. Climate of apathy, the ruination of nature, is an implicit assumption of the current capitalist system. While the terms apocalypse fatigue and doomsday fatigue have joined similar ones like climate fatigue, environment fatigue, and green fatigue, all these imply not only a mature and dutiful citizenry, but one exhausted from fending off ecological catastrophe, which is, of course, ridiculous. In fact, around 10 years ago, an especially large drop in climate concern coincided with a deluge of high-quality climate change research alerting people to the need for urgent action. In the most comprehensive study of its kind, titled Declining Public Concern About Climate Change, Global Environmental Change, May 2012, political scientists Lyle Scruggs and Salil Benegal analyzed data over the last 30 years and demonstrated that climate concern is on a downward slope, with recent years showing the most precipitous decline. The seemingly suicidal ditching of climate concern was blamed initially on economic woes, but environmental researchers gradually discovered that education, rather than being the master key to responsible and ethical behavior as one might think, can actually make things worse. Called the cultural backfire effect, it refers to the way in which people retaliate against facts, disconfirming their cultural beliefs by actually strengthening those beliefs, even when they are blatantly erroneous. Researchers at Yale University's Cultural Cognition Project studied this effect in relation to the climate change beliefs of different political parties in the US. For Republicans, most of whom do not believe in climate change, as their factual knowledge of climate change increased, they actually became less likely to believe in it. For Democrats, as their factual knowledge increased, they were more likely to believe, even when they knew less than Republicans. Such findings demonstrate what our beliefs are much That our beliefs are much less a product of what we know or what is right or wrong than who we are by virtue of our cultural identities, an overarching cultural system. Sorry, this article is a little longer than I thought it was, but I'm going to try and read the rest. Yet the reason that people in general, regardless of subgroupings, are so feckless and impassive, and their actions so antithetical to what they must be at this pivotal crossroads in our existence, is that everyone has been assimilated into an overarching cultural system whose lifeblood is the mercenary indifference and irresponsibility of its followers. Consumer culture has endowed its unfinished personalities with minimal aptitude or motivation for constructive disobedience, while the young are the historical igniters of social change. Today's de-idealized youth are the most conventional and conformist generation in history, with most being huddled around the same dead zone of market-driven values, commercialized meanings, and digital distractions. I actually disagree with that paragraph. Totally wrong, because actually people really, really want change. The more radical, the better. And this is why political figures such as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are so popular. Why? Because she's radical. Why was Bernie Sanders popular? Because he was radical. People want radical change. They don't want little, they don't want incremental, like, oh, maybe we'll just do a little adjusting. They don't want that. That's not what they want. They know that it has to be radical. It's a matter of just jumping out there and saying, like, here we go. Aligned to the forces of destruction, it was once assumed that if the democratic process could be perfected, the will of the people would blossom forth in the service of the greater good. But democracy is proving worthless and even counterproductive. Or maybe democracy owned by oligarchy, who knows? As a solution to the ecological crisis and other side effects of our obsolete cultural system, once a critical mass of the population becomes fully aligned to the forces of destruction, as it has today, democracy becomes more of a liability than a solution. At that point, society finds itself in a psycho-spiritual plight as great as any of its political, economic, or technological ones. Experiments in eco-religion or green religion reasoned that the type and degree of change required today can only be achieved through spiritual growth and enlightenment. But these failed, with none able to compete with the rapidly demoralizing society, as well as the honeyed prosperity theology and consumer theology, movements peddling less sin, soul, and sacrifice, and more getting than giving. Above self, only the odd, die-hard biophile or flower child still preaches love as the revolutionary force that could awaken a higher humanity and reverse our death march. People have become less lovable, both in terms of their lovableness and, more crucially, their ability to love. And toward a culture of responsibility, Yasuhiko Genku Kimura singles out the current consensus, saying, the pandemic of irresponsibility bespeaks a pandemic of lovelessness in the world. More to the point, Noam Chomsky states, if you care about other people, that's now a very dangerous idea. To care about anything above or outside of oneself has become culturally dangerous, and most dangerous of all, to the entire enterprise of apocalyptic capitalism, would be a populace attuned to the sacredness and supremacy of nature, as tended to be the case throughout most of human history. The great law of the Iroquois required that all major decisions be taken with consideration of people and the land 7 generations into the future. Oh dear Lord, we need that. We need that great law right now. Chief Luther Standing Bear, the renowned author and philosopher head of the Oglala Lakota Iroquois, who felt morally bound to remain a chronic disturber despite his claim, observed, a man's heart away from nature becomes hard. Our alienation from nature undoubtedly contributes to our relentless abuses of it, as well as our perversion of priorities and total loss of cosmic grounding. Who are we? Or who we are has never been more incompatible with who we need to be. What we have become is the greatest threat to ourselves and the planet. We have been perfectly groomed psychologically and spiritually for disaster. We have become hard. We are the people of the apocalypse. And that is the end of that article. I hope you enjoyed that. Interesting perspective. I don't know that I agree with all of it. Maybe we become the opposite of hard. Maybe we become soft. I think, and not soft as in soft-hearted, but soft as in soft-willed, as in too comfortable for our own good, too comfortable to go out and possibly meet some harm, because, you know, we've got our daily needs met, and we've got, you know, some things to distract us, and you know, why rock the boat? I think that's a very, very large part of our problem right now as well. Anyways, thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to contribute to this channel, you can do so at the links below and the address below. Until next time, peace.